Hey everyone. Tonight we're stepping into a world where being sick was often worse than the sickness itself. This is why you wouldn't survive Roman medicine. You wake in a dim stone room. The walls sweat with dampness, and the air is thick with the sour tang of smoke and stagnant water drifting in from the streets outside. Your head pounds, a deep throb just behind your eyes. You want medicine, something to ease the pain. But this is Rome, maybe around the 2nd century, and medicine is not what you imagine it to be. A man in a toga enters, carrying a small bronze bowl and a set of metal instruments. His hands smell of wine, garlic, and sweat. In the torchlight, you see scalpels, forceps, a probe. They gleam, not because they're sterile, but because they're polished from use. He feels your pulse with a solemn expression, mutters about an imbalance in your humors, and already you know what's coming. The solution to pain, to fever, to imbalance of any kind is often bloodletting. This is the foundation of Roman medicine, the belief that your body is ruled by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The idea comes from the Greeks, especially Hippocrates in the 5th century BCE, and the Romans carried it forward. When your humors fell out of balance, disease struck. A good physician's task was not to fight bacteria or viruses, those ideas were centuries away, but to restore harmony by draining, purging, or sweating out what was wrong. The most famous Roman physician was Galen of Pergamon, born in 129 CE. He treated gladiators, observed their wounds, and experimented on animals, since human dissection was largely forbidden. From this, he wrote vast volumes on anatomy and treatment. Galen was brilliant for his time, and yet tragically mistaken. He insisted that veins carried blood that ebbed and flowed like tides. He believed in humors as absolute truth. His texts became the medical gospel for more than 1,000 years. Another voice in Rome was Celsus, who lived in the 1st century and wrote De Medicina. His encyclopedia survives today, offering detailed instructions on surgery, fevers, fractures, and even cataract removal. Reading it now feels unsettling because his advice is clear, confident, and often horrifying. He describes amputations done with iron knives, cauterization with hot irons, and kidney stone extractions performed with crude hooks. All of it without anesthesia, without antiseptics, without pain relief beyond a gulp of wine and perhaps the strong grip of slaves holding you down. The Romans had medicines too: plants, minerals, animal products. Some worked in small ways. Willow bark, which contained salicin, eased pain like a primitive aspirin. Poppy juice gave relief, though its dosing was uncertain and dangerous. Other remedies were less useful. Powdered viper's flesh, mouse brains, crocodile dung, all had their place in Roman recipes. The problem was never intention. The problem was dosage, understanding, and the constant shadow of infection. Survival was always a gamble. A small wound might fester. A surgery might save you or kill you within days. Even simple remedies could poison as easily as they cured. And still, doctors pressed on, armed with conviction that their methods were right. So tonight, settle in, dim your lights, and imagine what it felt like to be at the mercy of treatments that sound more like punishments. Doctors who believed they were balancing your fluids by cutting you open, and a world where every cure carried the risk of ending your life. This is the beginning of your journey through Roman medicine, and already, survival feels uncertain. Now that you've met your physician and seen the world you've woken into, it's time to look closer at the doctors themselves, who they were, where they came from, and why trusting one could be as dangerous as the illness itself. The cut on your arm is bandaged, but the fever remains. The doctor has gone, leaving the faint smell of bronze and old wine behind him. You lie in the half-dark, and you start to wonder who these men really are, these people you entrust with your body. In Rome, A physician is not always who you imagine. Many are Greeks, brought west as slaves after conquests, then freed and hired as healers. Some are philosophers, who chose medicine as a craft of reason. Others are barbers, who learned to stitch wounds. Midwives who turned their knowledge of childbirth into something broader. Or traveling quacks who peddle charms and claim the blessings of the gods. You never quite know which one has entered your room until it is too late. The rich have their own doctors, men like Galen, who serve emperors and gladiators. But for most, medicine comes from the marketplace. Stalls cluttered with jars of herbs, powders, and roots. Men shout their remedies with the same rhythm as butchers and bakers. A cure for coughs, a draught for sleepless nights, a poultice for wounds that refuse to close. The smell of dried plants, sour wine, and sweat clings to the air. There are also amulets, strung on leather cords, small carved figures of gods meant to guard against plague. Inscribed tablets buried beneath thresholds to keep sickness from crossing a home. These are not mere decorations. To Romans, medicine and magic are tightly bound. Disease is not only imbalance, it may be curse, punishment, or evil air rising from swamps. Doctors themselves sometimes prescribe spells alongside salves. If you are poor, you do not summon a learned physician. You might trust the old woman in your insula, who knows which weeds grow between paving stones, and which can be boiled into teas. You might ask the midwife who has seen 100 labors. Their knowledge is not written in parchment, but passed through memory, through trial, through survival. If you are wealthy, you bring the physician into your atrium. He carries scrolls, references Galen or Hippocrates, and charges heavily for his presence. He might have a staff of assistants, one to grind herbs, another to prepare hot irons, another to hold the patient steady when the pain begins. It feels more like ceremony than science. Sometimes, doctors are resented. Pliny the Elder once called them greedy, reckless, and dangerous, warning that their mistakes cost countless lives. And yet people kept calling them, because what else could they do? Without them, there was only prayer and chance. You shift on your bed, your arm throbbing where the incision still weeps beneath the bandage. You think of the man who stood over you, educated, confident, expensive. But in another household, in another alleyway of the city, someone else lies under the same fever, treated by a woman with no books, only a basket of leaves. Both of you hope, both of you gamble. And in Rome, medicine is always a gamble.
The fever lingers, and now the doctor speaks of intervention. His voice is steady, almost casual, as if pain is an ordinary language. In Rome, surgery is not a last resort, but a frequent answer. You try not to watch as he opens his bronze case again. The instruments glint in the oil lamp's light. Scalpels with curved and straight blades. Hooks sharp enough to catch torn flesh. Long probes that can be pushed deep into a wound to test its path. Bone saws small enough to rest in one hand. There are no gloves, no disinfectant, no clean gauze. Only cloth strips boiled in wine and hope that the gods are watching. If you had broken a bone in the street, this is what would happen. The doctor would pull hard, setting it by force, then bind it tightly with wooden splints. No X-ray confirms the alignment. No plaster cast secures the healing. If it sets crooked, you will limp for the rest of your life. If your eye had clouded with cataract, the solution is a thin needle, thrust directly into the eyeball. The technique is called couching. The surgeon pushes the opaque lens down and out of sight, leaving you able to see again, if the eye does not swell, fester, or collapse. Many never make it through. Those who do see dimly, the world blurred, but a little less dark. For head injuries, there is trepanation. A small drill bit is turned by hand, slowly boring into the skull to relieve pressure or let out what the physician believes is corrupt fluid. You lie awake through the grinding of metal on bone. Wire may dull the edges, but it cannot silence the sound inside your skull. If infection comes, there is nothing more to be done. Celsus described amputations with the surgeon's calm detachment. He wrote of cutting away flesh, tying arteries with linen thread, sawing through bone, and sealing the wound with hot iron. Assistants restrain you as the heat presses down, the smell of charred skin filling the air. No one pretends it is merciful. It is simply survival, if you are lucky enough to call it that. Dentistry is no gentler. Rotten teeth are pulled with iron forceps, twisted until they snap free. Mouth rinses of vinegar or herbs may follow, but the wound is left to heal on its own. There are no fillings, no crowns, no Novocaine. Only the sound of your own breath and the bite of iron against enamel. And always, hovering above all of this, is bloodletting. A fever? Let the blood. A headache? Open a vein. Stomach pain? Perhaps more blood will flow out the sickness. Galen believed veins carried not just blood, but spirits, and releasing them might restore balance. To refuse the cut is to refuse treatment itself. You endure, because there is no alternative. The air is thick with sweat and metal, the lamp guttering low, your pulse loud in your ears. You think of the clean hospitals of the future, of anesthesia, of antiseptic, of quiet recovery. None of that exists here. Only the iron in the doctor's hand, the faith of his training, and the narrow chance that your body will survive what he has done.
You are carried from your home into a different kind of space, not the private atrium of a wealthy house, not the cramped stall of a marketplace healer, but a Roman hospital. These are called valetudinaria, built first for slaves and soldiers, then for the empire's armies spread across the provinces. If you are a soldier, this is where your wounds will be treated. The room is orderly in a way most Roman spaces are not. Stone walls divide patients from one another, narrow windows let in air, and corridors open into small treatment rooms. The air smells of vinegar and oil, mixed with the sharper sting of iron. Unlike the chaos of the city's street doctors, here the work is organized, almost mechanical. Soldiers are too valuable to be left to chance. A farmer's son might be allowed to heal at home with a poultice and prayer, but a legionary carries the empire on his shoulders. The state invests in him. In these hospitals, military physicians, medici, treat wounds quickly, sometimes brutally, but with an efficiency born of repetition. Broken bones are set. Arrowheads are pried from flesh. Blades are heated red to cauterize gashes before infection spreads. The army carries its own medical kit, scalpels, probes, hooks, bandages, all packed in wooden chests that travel wherever the legions march. Soldiers know pain as routine, but here it is codified, trained, expected. They are stitched together and sent back to the line if they can stand, discharged only if they cannot. Civilians rarely see these places. In Rome itself, there are no public hospitals. Families care for the sick in their own homes, or they pay physicians to come to them. The poor rely on charms, herbs, or neighborhood healers. Only slaves on great estates might be taken to a small voluntarium, where their bodies are treated not for their own sake, but because their labor is too valuable to waste. Religion hangs over the bed as much as medicine. The army keeps shrines to Asclepius, god of healing, within its camps. Soldiers pray before the altar and then submit to the surgeon's knife. In the city, temples to Asclepius rise on islands and hills where the sick sleep overnight, hoping for a dream sent by the god to reveal their cure. Doctors sometimes walk between these worlds, half surgeon, half priest, never drawing a clean line between faith and practice. If you are lying here now, you notice the rhythm of military care. The physician does not linger. He checks your wound, barks an order, applies wine to wash the cut, binds it tightly, and moves on to the next man. There is no bedside manner, no gentle words. Efficiency is the medicine. Survival is the only measure of success. And yet, even here, death is never far. Infection spreads quickly in crowded wards. Fever sweeps through the beds before anyone can stop it. Some men recover and march again. Others are buried outside the camp walls, their names scratched on wooden markers that rot in the rain. The legion is a machine, and medicine is only another gear in its turning. You are just one more body to mend, patch, or discard. In the end, survival here is not comfort. It is function.
You leave the order of the military ward and step back into the streets of Rome, where medicine is not clean walls and bronze tools, but jars, powders, and whispered advice. Here, survival depends less on the cut of a scalpel and more on the contents of a kitchen. In the cramped stalls of the forum, you see shelves lined with herbs bundled in twine, roots pulled fresh from the earth, jars of honey darkened with age. A man lifts a vial of liquid and swears it will cure your fever. Another offers a powder scraped from the shell of a tortoise. The air smells of crushed leaves, vinegar, and sweat. It is less a pharmacy than a marketplace of hope. Romans believed the natural world held endless cures: willow bark for pain, fennel for stomach cramps, garlic mashed into paste for wounds, poppy seeds steeped in wine for sleep that comes heavy and dreamless. Some of these worked, though no one knew why. Others were little more than ritual, repeated because someone once had survived long enough to swear by them. But the recipes go stranger: mouse brains ground with honey to ease sore throats, ashes of snails for coughs, powdered viper flesh mixed with wine for courage and healing. Pliny the Elder recorded hundreds of such remedies in his Natural History, a book that reads less like science and more like a catalog of human desperation. He listed charms too: wearing the right stone, saying the right words, tying amulets to your body to keep sickness away. Households kept their own apothecaries. Mothers boiled herbs for their children. Midwives mixed salves for labor. Slaves gathered plants from fields or gardens. The smell of boiling chamomile and rue might drift from a kitchen, strong enough to mask the sour odor of sickness behind the walls. Medicine here was intimate, woven into daily life, and sometimes it worked, but sometimes it killed. Poisons and remedies were often close siblings. Hemlock might calm spasms in a tiny dose and silence a man forever in a larger one. Mandrake soothed pain, but too much of it carried you past the edge of sleep. Wealthy Romans sometimes blurred these lines deliberately, hiring physicians not just to cure, but to kill discreetly, a poisoned draught disguised as a medicine.
And always, superstition clung to every cure. If your child had a fever, you might tie a red thread around his neck. If your wife could not conceive, you might bury charms in the garden soil. If plague swept through the streets, you might burn sulfur and hope the smoke drove out the evil air. You take a sip from a clay cup filled with some bitter mixture, thick with honey and herbs. It coats your tongue, numbing and sharp, and you cannot tell if it is saving you or slowly pulling you toward the edge. In Rome, that is the constant truth. Every swallow is a wager, every cure a gamble with your life.
You step outside into the pulse of the city, where medicine is not just knives and powders, but the very water you drink and the air you breathe. Rome prides itself on being clean, ordered, civilized, and at first glance, it is. Aqueducts stretch for miles, stone arches carrying clear streams from hills far away. Water gushes into public fountains, into cisterns, into the private homes of the rich. It feels miraculous, almost modern, a city where fresh water flows in every district. But as you drink, you do not know that the lead pipes carrying it leave behind invisible traces. Slowly, silently, they poison those who taste it. You wander into the baths, Rome's pride and daily ritual. The air is heavy with steam. Voices echo across marble halls. The slap of sandals rings against wet stone. Pools of hot and cold water lie side by side. Men sweat in the caldarium, plunge into the frigidarium, and scrape oil and dirt from their bodies with bronze strigils. To a Roman, this is health itself, cleanliness, exercise, and relaxation. But the baths are also breeding grounds. Warm water grows cloudy with sweat, dirt, and worse. A cut, a scrape, a moment of weakness, and infection spreads faster than the gossip floating over the steam. Beneath the streets runs another wonder, the Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's first great sewers. It drains the filth of the city into the Tiber, keeping streets from drowning in waste. But the river itself becomes the city's bloodstream, swelling with excrement, animal carcasses, and runoff. Those who drink directly from it swallow sickness whole. Romans believed disease floated in the air. Miasma, the breath of decay rising from swamps, marshes, and stagnant water. They were not entirely wrong. Malaria spread through the lowlands, its fever gripping those who lived too close to the Tiber's banks. The poor, packed up to the insulas with little air and less light, coughed through the nights, their bodies wasted by damp walls and foul air. To fight this, the wealthy filled their villas with gardens, fountains, and fresh breezes. They burned incense, sulfur, or pine to cleanse the air. They fled to the countryside during outbreaks, leaving the poor behind to endure. Medicine here was not a potion or a knife, but space, wealth, and clean air, a treatment only the elite could afford. You breathe in the steam of the baths, the sourness of the streets, the faint tang of lead from the cup you raised earlier. You realize Roman health is not only in the doctor's hands, but in the city itself. The aqueduct gives, and the aqueduct takes. The bath cleans, and the bath infects. The sewer drains, and the sewer poisons. Everywhere you turn, survival balances on the edge of unseen forces. And in Rome, you are never truly safe from what you cannot see.
The fever that grips you is not yours alone. Step outside, and the streets are heavy with the sound of coughing, the sight of pale faces, the smell of death rising from crowded homes. Rome is sick, and no amount of marble, aqueducts, or temples can mask it. Plague is the shadow that stalks the empire. In the 2nd century, soldiers returning from the East carry with them what later generations will call the Antonine Plague. It rips through the city like fire. Some say it was smallpox, others measles, but no one truly knows. What is certain is its toll. Millions across the empire, whole legions withering, families emptied in days. Galen himself describes pustules blooming across the skin, fever that does not break, and a death that comes slowly, then suddenly. A century later, another wave strikes, the plague of Cyprian. It lingers for decades, striking cities and villages alike. Men collapse in the streets, bleeding from their eyes, their mouths, their very skin. The stench of burning corpses rises as funeral pyres smoke day and night. Rome, the eternal city, smells like rot. The city responds with ritual as much as medicine. Processions wind through the streets, carrying offerings to Asclepius and Apollo. Priests chant, incense burns, and sacrifices are made. But the deaths continue. Temples fill with the sick who lie on the cold floors, waiting for divine dreams to bring cures. If you are among them, you hear the moans echo beneath vaulted ceilings, the shuffle of desperate feet, the hollow prayers rising into air, thick with incense and disease. Doctors are powerless. They bleed patients, administer herbs, apply poultices, but the plague ignores them all. Even Galen, Rome's most celebrated physician, retreats to his country estate when the Antonine Plague surges, leaving the city to its fate. Knowledge fails, courage fails, and superstition takes its place. For the poor, there is no escape. Crowded into insulae, whole families fall together. Bodies are carried out daily, stacked on carts, dumped into mass graves. The sound of wailing never ends. For the wealthy, there is flight. To villas in the countryside, to mountain air, far from the infected city. Yet even there, the sickness often follows, carried by servants, by travelers, by the invisible air itself. You lie awake at night and hear the city in mourning. Dogs howl, funeral horns sound. The streets are eerily quiet, except for the slow roll of carts carrying the dead. You do not need a diagnosis. You know that survival here is not in medicine, not in prayer, not even in wealth. It is chance. A roll of the dice the gods throw at men. And in Rome, when plague comes, chance is rarely kind.
You are no longer the patient this time. You are the one waiting beside the bed, where a woman labors through the night. Her cries echo against the plaster walls, sharp, unrelenting, the sound of life and death balanced on a knife's edge. In Rome, childbirth is not a moment of joy, it is a gamble, and the odds are poor. Midwives run the room. They are women trained not in scrolls or lectures, but in practice, memory, and instinct. Their tools are simple: cloths, oils, herbal drafts, and the strength of their own hands. They murmur encouragement. They rub the mother's belly. They whisper charms against evil spirits. For Romans believed that birth was not just a physical struggle, but a spiritual one, where unseen forces might strike down mother or child. The risks are everywhere: a baby lodged the wrong way, a cord tangled and choking, a womb that will not contract, bleeding the mother dry. There is no cesarean section that saves both mother and child. If the knife comes out, it is to rescue the baby from a body already gone cold. Survival for both is rare.
Herbs ease the pain, but they carry their own dangers. Poppy juice may quiet her screams, but too much sends her into silence forever. Mandrake roots numb, but they also poison. Midwives know the line, but in the chaos of labor, that line is easily crossed. For the infant, survival is no less uncertain. Romans bury babies in countless small graves, reminders of how fragile life begins. Disease, malnutrition, infection, any one of them can end a child's first year before it has truly begun. The cries of newborns mingle with funeral hymns in the same streets. Wealth brings some comfort. A wealthy woman may have several midwives, nurses ready to feed and care for the infant, charms to hang above the bed, offerings to the gods. But even in marble villas, mothers die. Even in the arms of wealth, infants fade. No amount of silver can buy safety when medicine has no answer. You grip the woman's hand as she fights to bring new life into the world. The air smells of sweat, blood, and burning oil. The midwife bends low, urging her to push, whispering words that blend medicine with magic. At last, a cry fills the room. The baby is here. Relief washes over you, but it is fragile, fleeting. The night has taken so many, and tonight it has spared one, for now. In Rome, every birth is both a beginning and a brush with death, and too often it is death that wins.
You wake in the night with no wound, no fever, no plague, but something is wrong all the same. Your thoughts race, your sleep is broken, your moods swing like the Tiber's tides. In Rome, this is not simply sickness of the body, it is madness, a disturbance of the soul itself. The Romans had no clean word for mental health. They spoke instead of furor and insomnia, of melancholy and mania. To them, the mind was bound to the body through humors. Too much black bile could sink you into despair. Too much yellow bile could ignite you into rage. If your balance broke, so did your reason. Treatment was uncertain. Some physicians prescribed music, poetry, or philosophy, remedies for the spirit as much as the flesh. Others bled the patient, hoping to drain away the imbalance. Baths were offered for calm, wine for ease, herbs for sleep. Poppy juice might silence the voices in your head, though it silenced much else too. But not all madness was pitied. The line between illness and possession blurred. If you spoke strangely, if you laughed at shadows, if you screamed in the forum, some would say you were cursed by the gods or seized by spirits. Families sometimes hid the afflicted, shutting them away behind walls. The poor had fewer choices. Madness played out in the streets, where superstition did the rest. Philosophers wrote about the soul's health as though it could be trained like the body. Stoics counseled discipline, Epicureans moderation. But these were comforts for the literate, not cures for the suffering. For the man who heard voices, or the woman who wandered in fits, there was little beyond restraint, prayer, and chance. You imagine lying in your bed as neighbors whisper. Some suggest a healer, others an exorcism, others that the gods are punishing you. You are bled. You are bathed. You are prayed over. Perhaps the madness passes. Perhaps it deepens. No one knows why. In Rome, the body can be cut, cauterized, or stitched, but the mind is a darker frontier. And for those who lose themselves, there is no returning cure. Only the slow drift between pity, fear, and forgetting. You wake to the sound of bells, not in the forum but in a temple courtyard. The air is thick with incense, the faint sweetness clinging to your clothes, and you realize Roman medicine is not just scalpels and herbs, it is prayers, sacrifices, and the hope that the gods themselves might take notice of your pain. If your fever lingers, or if your wound festers despite the physician's poultices, your family may lead you to a shrine. The most famous of these belongs to Asclepius, the Greek god of healing, whose cult the Romans gladly adopted. His temple stood on the Tiber Island, a place of pilgrimage for the sick. You would sleep there, waiting for a dream in which the god might whisper the cure. It could be as simple as bathing in cold water, or as strange as rubbing an onion on your chest. If the dream came true, you would leave behind a clay model of the healed body part, an arm, a leg, even a set of eyes, as proof of divine medicine. And it wasn't only Asclepius. Juno was invoked for women in childbirth, Apollo for plagues, Salus for general health. Each god had a role, each temple a ritual. If herbs failed, perhaps a sacrifice of a goat would persuade the heavens. If bleeding didn't calm your pain, then chance might. Religion filled the gaps where reason faltered. For ordinary Romans, temples were often more accessible than physicians. Doctors cost money. Priests asked only for offerings. And while a physician's tools might scar you or kill you, the gods at least offered comfort and the reassurance that illness had meaning, that it was punishment, or trial, or fate. Imagine lying on a stone floor, waiting for a vision. Around you, others murmur in the dark, coughing, groaning, whispering prayers. The temple smells of smoke and sweat, of animal sacrifice and human desperation. And when a priest announces the god's will, perhaps that you must drink a mixture of herbs or wash in a river, you obey. Not because it is proven, but because the gods have spoken. For the Romans, medicine was never just flesh and blood. It was a conversation with higher powers, a way to make sense of suffering. The knife and the prayer existed side by side, neither trusted fully, but neither abandoned. Now that you've seen the temples and their healing dreams, let's move to the battlefield, where Roman medicine was tested most brutally, not in quiet rooms, but amid the roar of war. You're no longer in a temple now. You're in a Roman military camp. The earth packed hard beneath your feet, the air heavy with sweat, blood, and iron. War, after all, was where Roman medicine faced its harshest trials. And you're not a visitor here. You're a soldier who has just taken a spear to the thigh. The pain is white hot, your tunic soaked crimson, and suddenly you understand. Whatever Roman doctors do to you next might decide whether you live or die. In the Roman legions, each camp had its own medici, army doctors trained not in luxury, but in survival. Their toolkit was brutally efficient. Knives for cutting, probes for fishing out arrowheads, and saws. Yes, saws, for removing what couldn't be saved. The battlefield left no time for hesitation. If you were bleeding too heavily, a soldier nearby might press a burning iron to your wound. The stench of scorched flesh filled the air, but the bleeding stopped. That was victory enough. The Romans were practical. They didn't seek to preserve beauty or even comfort. They sought to keep bodies moving, men fighting. A deep cut might be stitched roughly with linen thread, tightened hard enough to close, but leaving scars you'd carry forever. If infection set in later, that was fate. If you lived long enough to march again, the gods had favored you. Picture yourself in a makeshift tent, the sound of distant trumpets outside, your comrades groaning beside you. A medic kneels over you with bronze instruments, still sticky from the last patient. He digs into your wound without hesitation, muttering instructions to the orderly holding you down. No anesthesia, just grit, sweat, and the hope you pass out before the pain rips you apart. It wasn't all guesswork, though. Roman military surgeons knew how to bind broken bones with splints. They carried bandages of wool and linen soaked in vinegar or wine, used both to cleanse and to numb. They understood that water alone could rot wounds, that cleanliness mattered, though they explained it more in terms of humors and balance than microbes. For their time, it was astonishing progress. For you, lying on that cot, it was still closer to torture than healing. And then came the amputation. If your limb was too damaged, the medic didn't debate philosophy. He sawed. Fast, brutal, final. No morphine, no chloroform. Just a strong grip on your shoulders and the bite of iron into bone. The lucky ones lost consciousness from shock. The unlucky ones lived every second of it, awake to the sound of their own bones splitting. Yet somehow, many soldiers survived. The Romans had learned that wine cleansed wounds better than stagnant water, that pressure and cautery could save lives, and that speed mattered more than perfection. It was a medicine forged in war, as ruthless as the empire itself. Now that you've survived the surgeon's tent, barely, let's step away from the battlefield, because not every Roman cure involved iron and fire. Some were gentler, stranger, and closer to what we might recognize as folk remedies.
You limp back from the battlefield and into the quiet of a Roman home, where medicine looks less like knives and cauterization and more like cupboards filled with jars, herbs, and charms. Household cures were the true first line of defense. Before you ever saw a physician or the inside of a military tent, you would have been dosed, rubbed, or smoked with something pulled from the kitchen or the garden. Take garlic, for instance. Romans believed it gave strength to soldiers and stamina to workers, but it was also used as a cure. Crushed and mixed with wine, it was given for coughs. Rubbed raw on skin, it was supposed to draw out poison from bites or stings. If you had worms, the answer was simple. Garlic, again, swallowed whole. It didn't matter if it burned going down. Burning was often seen as proof it was working. Honey was another favorite. Sticky, golden, and sweet, it coated sore throats, but it also dressed wounds. The Romans noticed that wounds covered in honey seemed to fester less, heal faster. Without knowing why, they stumbled onto one of the earliest natural antiseptics. So if you cut your hand on a shard of pottery, your mother might smear it with honey and wrap it tight with wool. But not all remedies were so logical. For a toothache, you might be told to catch a frog at night and spit into its mouth before setting it free. For a fever, wearing an amulet carved with strange letters might be recommended. Children often had little charms hung around their necks, protective trinkets meant to guard them from illness, or at least to distract worried parents from their helplessness. Wine was everywhere in Roman medicine. It washed wounds, it was mixed with herbs, it was swallowed to ease pain, and sometimes it was simply drunk until you forgot your suffering. If garlic and honey failed, there was always more wine. Imagine being sick in a Roman home. Your family brings you warm broth, but they also hang charms by your bed. A relative mutters a protective chant, while another prepares a poultice of herbs crushed with olive oil. You breathe in their sharp, bitter scent as they are smeared on your chest. The remedies might not work, but the rituals, the fussing, the offerings, the whispered prayers gave comfort. Roman medicine was layered this way. Rational remedies like honey and vinegar sat alongside folk practices rooted in fear and faith. You might not know if your cure came from nature, from superstition, or from both, but if it kept you alive, it was enough. Now that you've tasted the household remedies of garlic and honey, it's time to look at the bigger picture,
the theories behind all these practices. Because Roman medicine wasn't just about what you swallowed or rubbed on your skin. It was about balance, humors, and a worldview that shaped every diagnosis.
You've made it through the temples, the battlefield tents, and the kitchen remedies. Now we arrive at the heart of Roman medicine, the philosophy that tied it all together. If you were Roman, every cough, every fever, every strange ache in your bones wasn't random. It was your humors out of balance. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. 4 invisible fluids swirling through your body, governing everything from your health to your personality. Too much blood? You were feverish. Too much black bile? You were melancholic. It was simple, elegant, and disastrously wrong. Picture yourself with a pounding headache. Today, you'd reach for water, aspirin, maybe a quiet nap. In Rome, the physician would study your eyes, your tongue, the way you breathed, and then decide which humor had rebelled. If it was blood, you'd be bled with a knife until you grew pale and dizzy. If it was phlegm, expect emetics, potions to make you vomit. If bile was to blame, you'd be purged until your body ached and you were left too weak to argue. The Romans didn't practice this in ignorance. They truly believed they were restoring harmony. Health was balance. Illness was excess. And the physician's role was to reset your body like a scale tipped the wrong way. And so, even if you had a small infection that might have healed on its own, you were subjected to bleeding, purging, or sweating, all in the name of harmony. And yet, for all its flaws, Roman medicine was a foundation. They preserved Greek medical texts, built aqueducts that brought clean water into cities, and promoted public baths, sewers, and sanitation. They recognized the link between environment and disease, even if they explained it in terms of miasmas, bad air, rather than microbes. They trained physicians, compiled herbals, and left behind volumes that would shape medicine for centuries. But let's be honest, you wouldn't survive it. You wouldn't survive the battlefield amputation without anesthesia, the temple cures that relied on dreams, the kitchen remedies of garlic shoved down your throat, or the endless bleedings meant to calm your humors. Survival wasn't guaranteed in Rome. It wasn't even likely. Illness was a daily threat, infection a silent killer, and medicine, more often than not, a gamble. So dim the lights, settle into your modern bed, and take a deep breath of clean air. Think of the running water in your pipes, the antibiotics waiting at the pharmacy, the comfort of knowing a fever isn't a death sentence. The Romans gave us roads, law, language, but if you had to rely on their medicine, you'd be a story carved into stone long before your time. And maybe that's the final irony. Their medicine would not have saved you, but their history, their words, their strange cures and desperate rituals, they've survived. And tonight, so have you.